Okay, so here's our lesson on arrays. And I'm going to do a pretty in-depth demo on arrays tomorrow. And I will refer to that throughout the video. So what are arrays? An array is a container that holds a fixed number of values or objects of the same type. The size of the array, or in other words, how many items it can hold, is determined when it is created or instantiated. So instantiated is another word for creating. Once creating, its size is fixed. An array looks like a CD rack with different slots. Each slot has an index value, so we can refer to its specific location. Just like a string, arrays have a built-in parameter called length. Notice that it is a constant. It is not a method, although its name is the same. And what length does is it tells us how many items the array can store. Index values start at 0 and go up to length -1. That too is similar to a string, where we saw index values for every character starting from 0 and going up to whatever the length was -1. Now, creating an array is a little more complicated than creating strings, ints, doubles, or booleans. Suppose we want to create an array of integers called scores that will hold 8 items or 8 integers. So what we do is we use the keyword int, a set of square brackets, space, and then we give it a name. In our case, it's scores. And then we say equals new, a space, and then we say int, a set of square brackets, but inside the square brackets, now we give it a number. And so in this case, since I said we were going to create an array that held 8 items, I put an 8 inside the square brackets and then semicolon. I have to put a number in there if I create or instantiate the array this way. So notice the use of square brackets. Also notice the 8 in the square brackets. This tells Java the size. So if I wanted to draw a picture of what I've just done, all I've done is create the CD rack, so to speak. I turned it on its side. Scores is a reference variable that points to this array. Notice it's every cell in the array is empty. Why? Because we haven't stored anything in any of the cells yet. Also notice that each slot in the array or each cell in the array has an index value associated with it that starts from 0 and goes to the length -1, just like for a string. So when we create the array, it's empty. We have to write other code to populate each slot in the array or populate the slots we want information in. Sometimes we'll write a loop to populate the array, and I'll demo that in class tomorrow. But for today's notes, all I'm going to do is just use assignment, and then I'll also show you how to do some simple calculations to populate some of these cells. So what we're going to do is we're going to add multiples of 10. So what follows is the code to do so. So in other words, when I'm all done, I want to see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80 in the cells. So a simple way to do that, if I just want to, by brute force or by assignment, put those values in the cells, all I do is give the name of the array, the set of square brackets, and I put the index value that I want to assign the value to. And I put an equal sign and then the value. Notice I am assigning an integer. If I try to assign this cell to a double or a boolean or a string, I'm going to get a compiling error because I told Java that this array was going to store integers, so I can only put integers in any of the cells. We can also populate the cells in this array using calculations or by referring to other cell locations. So for example, using a calculation, I'm going to populate cell scores of 5 equal to 6 times 10 because the next number is 60. In scores of 6, I could say take scores of 5, which is 60, and add 10 to give me 70. And then for the final cell, scores of 7, I could take scores of 0, which is 10, times 8 gives me 80. So at this point, we'd get 60, 70, and 80 in those cells. If we want to store how many items in the array using the length parameter into an integer parameter, like if I needed to know how many items were stored, I could use the length constant. This comes automatically with every array that's created. All I have to do is say the name of the array scores dot length, and then I'm going to assign it to some variable now. We'll play with that more tomorrow. Now I'm going to kind of throw a monkey wrench into everything. There is another way to create and populate the cells in an array in one step. That's by using something called an initializer list. So this is even more complicated than just creating an empty array, but it's very efficient because we'll be using many fewer lines of code to populate the array with what we want. So for this example, I want to create or instantiate an array of strings such that each cell in the array is one of the words "Hail to the victors," and I want to use an initializer list. Look how simple this is. All I have to do is say string, square brackets, space words, equals, a set of curly brackets, and then each string separated by commas. So hail would go into position 0, to would go into position 1, the would go into position 2, and victors would go into position 3. Also notice that I'm using the double quotes to indicate that it's a string. If we wanted to print the number of elements in the array words, we would use the length constant. So again, we would say the name of the array words.length, and we would assign it to the integer num. If we try to access an array location that doesn't exist, like words of 6, we will get an array index out of bounds exception. All right, that'll do it for tonight, and tomorrow we'll do a demo. Thanks.